Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the next big thing in sports podcast. My name is Matt McCoy, and as you know, we're running through this thing this morning. I am the host of your podcast, and we're excited to have you in for this episode. In this episode, we are going to dive into our big board for our 2019 fantasy football season. We're after the draft, had time to analyze a little bit about the fits for all of the rookies coming in. And now we have updated our big board, and we're going to share it with you and go down one by one and kind of dive in a little bit, kind of analyze differences what we have on our big board versus what we're seeing out there in the fantasy draft community. So without further ado, let's introduce ourselves again. We are the next big thing in sports podcast. You can always find us anywhere that has the podcast platform. That is your typical Apple iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and upon your arrival to these platforms, after you listen to an episode or two, if you would, leave us a 5-star review. We appreciate the feedback. We appreciate the partnership between our listeners out there and our website here and our podcast. I mentioned our website. We are the next big thing in sports.com. That's our online version. When you peruse that website, you'll find our updated fantasy football rankings. You'll find some of our NFL predictions for the season's right around the corner. It'll be here in a few months. And also, we're diving into our 2020 scouting community, diving into our rankings for next year's draft, and just kind of getting you up to speed and prepared for the college football season, which, again, will be here in just about 3 months and change. So, it's never too early to get prepared. I know you guys are football junkies out there like we are. So, I say, if you're anything like us, it's never too early to dive back in. So, we're going to dive in. We use a half-point PPR format for our big board rankings. And so we're going to start right at the top. So the first thing that you'll notice is the general consensus out there is that number 1 is Saquon Barkley and number 2 is Ezekiel Elliott. Well, on our big board, we have them flipped. We have Zeke number 1 and Barkley number 2. And, you really can't go wrong either way with these two guys. Very similar prospects, so ingrained into your offense. Just feel slightly a little bit more comfortable with Zeke. I'm not a Dak Prescott fan by any stretch of the imagination, but I have to admit I'm a little more comfortable with Dak than I am Eli Manning or if the Giants season goes to the tubes and they want to get a look at their first-round pick, Daniel Jones, thinking about the effect he might have on their offense. I think the Cowboys' offensive line is a little better than the Giants. So I feel a little bit more comfortable with Zeke. Like I say, you're splitting hairs at the top, but for my money, Ezekiel Elliott deserves to be the number 1 player off the big board, and number 2 is Saquon Barkley. Number 3 in most drafts is Christian McCaffrey, and number 4 is Alvin Kamara. So this seems to be the delineating portion of the draft. You're seeing in some order Barkley, Elliott, McCaffrey, and Kamara coming off 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the vast majority of drafts. I believe the reason for that is the safety factor. Also, all 4 players are multifaceted. They are can affect the fantasy football game, as a receiver, as well as a runner in between the tackles. We give the advantage to Kamara. We have Kamara ranked number 3 and McCaffrey number 4. Again, you're splitting hairs a little bit here. They're so similar. The reason why I'm going with Alvin Kamara is even with a small sample size, we saw what Kamara can do without Mark Ingram. In the offseason, the Saints let Mark Ingram walk to the Baltimore Ravens, became a free agent signee in Baltimore, and they replaced him with Latavius Murray. I just don't think Latavius Murray is Mark Ingram. I think Murray is a good runner. I think Mark Ingram is an above-average runner. So I think they're going to lean on Alvin Kamara a little heavily or more so this year, gives him a few more opportunities. Again, I'm not down on Christian McCaffrey by any stretch of the imagination. I just think, again, it comes down to safety. I'm not 100% sure about Cam Newton. There is some concern out there about his shoulder, how he's going to rehab. The Panthers' offense, I don't think, is going to be as prolific as New Orleans. So, again, I just think a little more safety with Alvin Kamara. So I have him number 3 on our big board. And Alvin Kamara is Christian McCaffrey is number 4. So after those 4, in most drafts, Melvin Gordon seems to be coming off the board, number 5. And that's what we have as well. Again, I think there's a safety factor with Melvin Gordon. I think the Chargers are going to be one of the better offenses in the NFL. It seems like Gordon gets nicked and misses a game or two every single year. Hopefully he can put it all together in 2019 and have an injury-free season. And if so, he absolutely will warrant a top 5 pick in your fantasy drafts. And this is where we diverge a little bit from the mainstream. So the next 2 picks in most drafts have been DeAndre Hopkins. The first wide receiver off the board is number 6. And Davante Adams, right behind him, has come off the board in the 7th spot. Now, we prioritize running backs here, on our big board. So we will be a little bit different than what you'll see on the consensus. So we have Todd Gurley ranked number 6 on our big board. And in the consensus, I'm seeing him around number 8. So we're not as concerned with Gurley. I know there is concern out there about that knee, and people are reacting to the fact that the Los Angeles Rams traded up in the 3rd round of the draft to select Darrell Henderson, the explosive running back out of Memphis. In my opinion, I believe they drafted him to be a complement to Todd Gurley, not to siphon the workload off him. One of the points I'll make in a podcast in the future is it wasn't just that Todd Gurley was the number 1 running back in fantasy a year ago. He was the number 1 back by a wide margin. He just lapped the field last year, 2019. So, again, I understand the concern with Gurley, and you want to reduce the amount of risk with your first-round pick. So, I'm flexible. I'm willing to put him behind Zeke, Saquon Barkley, Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey, and Melvin Gordon. But that's as far as I'm willing to drop him. I'm not willing to put him behind, say, James Conner or Joe Mixon. I don't think these guys, or Le'Veon Bell, I don't think they have the kind of prolific upside that Todd Gurley does have. So we have him ranked number 6. Number 7, we have the aforementioned DeAndre Hopkins, so just 1 spot behind the consensus. I think you know what you're getting with DeAndre Hopkins. He is the centerpiece of the Houston Texans offense. I always say in previous podcasts, he is the apple of the eye of Deshaun Watson. They have a great connection there, so I like him, number 7 on our board. Number 8 on our board, we have Julio Jones. He's our number 2 ranked wide receiver, just slightly ahead of Davante Adams, who is our 3rd wide receiver and comes in number 9. So, talk about these guys a little bit. Julio, I think, just has a higher receiving yardage floor, and so he gets a nod for me above Davante Adams. But again, you're splitting hairs. You can go either way. If you had Adams ranked above Julio Jones, you won't get any complaints from me. I just think these guys are terrific talents, and I think both of them deserve to be in the late 1st round consideration. With the Packers, I'm expecting a better year offensively from Aaron Rodgers, and that will only benefit Davante Adams in 2019. And the final 3 players in the 1st round conversation in most drafts so far have been David Johnson coming in number 10, Julio Jones, who we just mentioned, number 11 in the consensus rankings. We have him ranked number 8 on our ranking. And number 12, Michael Thomas. And again, the difference for us is we prioritize the running back position. We do have Michael Thomas ranked number 10 on our big board, followed by James Conner and Joe Mixon. And I basically have these guys statted out evenly. Again, we just prioritize the running back position. We have them ranked a little higher than some people. And again, we have them ranked higher than David Johnson, who I'm just not as high on as some people. I'm just a little concerned about how he's going to adapt in the Cliff Kingsbury run and shoot style offense. I know that a colleague of mine explained to me that they do run the football a lot in that offense, but I'm just, again, when you're splitting hairs early in the draft, I like to go with people I'm comfortable with, and I'm a little more comfortable in the role James Conner has with the Steelers and Joe Mixon has with the Cincinnati Bengals. So those are the first 12, our first rounders. So we'll move on to the top half of how we evaluate or where we rank guys in the second round category. So the consensus right now, the next 3 picks are Odell Beckham Jr., 13th, James Conner, 14th, and Joe Mixon, 15th. Again, we just spoke about Conner and Mixon. We elevate them into our first round territory. For us, and our top next guys here in round 2, 13, 14, and 15 on our bait board is Le'Veon Bell, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Odell Beckham Jr. So you see Odell Beckham Jr. consensus number 13. We have him 15, so we're right in the same ballpark. I think he should fit in very well with Cleveland and Baker Mayfield heading up that offense. I really like Juju Smith-Schuster this year. We have him 14th. He is 17th in the consensus. Again, in the same ballpark. I just think that there's so many targets and opportunities there in Pittsburgh that Juju Smith-Schuster has a very safe outcome and projection. Le'Veon Bell, again, not as high on him as the consensus. We have him 13th on our board. In most drafts, he's coming off the board around pick number 9. Again, you're talking about the same realm, splitting hairs here. I am a little bit concerned about the fact that he did sit out a year last year, did not play football at all in 2018. He's changing to a new offense in New York under Adam Gase, and just not sure about how they're going to use him. And, will he get the same opportunities that he did in Pittsburgh? In Pittsburgh, he had Antonio Brown on the outside, Juju Smith-Schuster on the outside. You got Big Ben under center. And, Le'Veon Bell was in a great offense. In New York, I would not classify them as that quite yet. I don't think we know we have in Sam Darnold year number 2. So, again, I temper expectations for Le'Veon Bell a little bit. 16 through 18 on our big board. Dalvin Cook, running back out of Minnesota. Nick Chubb, running back out of Cleveland. And then David Johnson finally comes off our board on number 18. So, again, that's where you see the difference in the consensus right now. David Johnson is number 10 coming off the boards in most drafts. We have him ranked number 18. So, again, in those drafts, they see him as a late first rounder. We see him in more of a mid-second rounder. Just a little bit concerned about how that offense is going to go. I know they made improvements, but our offensive line is still a huge issue. Just not sure if David Johnson warrants a first-round pick when I feel a little more comfortable with, say, a James Conner, Joe Mixon, even a couple guys ahead of him that are probably a little controversial. I have Dalvin Cook 16 and Nick Chubb 17. So on most drafts, Nick Chubb has come off the board around pick number 18. So that's right in line with 17. But Dalvin Cook's coming off the board around pick number 22. So we have him 6 slots higher than the consensus. And just the reason being is I'm excited and I'm back on the board, back on the hype train for Dalvin Cook. I just think that the Vikings are going to be a good offense. I think they want to become more run-oriented. Latavius Murray is no longer a Minnesota Viking, so I don't think he'll be there to siphon off some of the workload for Dalvin Cook. I just think it's Dalvin Cook's show here in the backfield. I think they made some adjustments, drafted Garrett Bradbury in the first round of the 2019 NFL Draft to help solidify the interior of that offensive line. So, again, I think they're making a commitment to the run game. It's going to benefit Dalvin Cook. He's clearly talented. So, again, the injury bug has been the issue, but I'm expecting Dalvin Cook to have a big 2019 campaign. And now we'll run down on our big board 19 and 24. So our next 6 picks here, we have Antonio Brown, number 19 on our big board, followed by Mike Evans, wide receiver from Tampa Bay. Keenan Allen comes in number 21, the wide receiver from the Chargers. Number 22, T.Y. Hilton, another wide receiver from the Indianapolis Colts. 23, A.J. Green, wide receiver for Cincinnati. And 24, Travis Kelce, tight end from the Kansas City Chiefs. So let's start there. In most drafts, Travis Kelce is coming off the board around pick number 16. So That's the fourth pick in round 2. Just a little too early for my blood and my strategy. I really like Travis Kelce, don't get me wrong. I think that he could have a gigantic 2019, especially if Tyreek Hill is no longer a Kansas City Chief and not playing in the NFL. I expect Travis Kelce to get even more work in that offense. So, again, I don't want this to come off as a slight against Travis Kelce and people to say, well, you must hate Travis Kelce. It's just I prefer to lock down my running backs and wide receivers early in the draft. I believe the position thinned out quickly, and you have more position to fill. In most drafts, you have to fill two running back spots, two maybe to three wide receivers, a couple flex positions, and I like to have depth on my team and be able to have options. But taking a tight end early, I just don't. Not a fan of it. So it's like I say, nothing personal against Travis Kelce. Now, I will take him at the end of round 2. If I can pair him, say, if I have pick number 1, 2, maybe even pick number 3, if I can come away with a start of my lineup of Ezekiel Elliott and Travis Kelce, or Saquon Barkley and Travis Kelce, I'll be all for that. And I would just load up on wide receivers later on in the draft. But yeah, it's just tremendous value getting him there. I just can't pull the trigger on him above this next class of wide receivers. We kind of glossed over there. Antonio Brown, has been the best wide receiver on planet Earth for a number of years. I know he's changing teams. Go play for the Raiders. The offense is going to be different. Derek Carr is going to be throwing in the football as opposed to Big Ben Roethlisberger. But again, this was a guy who was locked and loaded to a top 5 to, say, 8 pick over the last 4 or 5 years. And now you're getting him in mid-round 2. I think it's tremendous value for a player who still got it in Antonio Brown. Mike Evans, I just think he's going to be the alpha of the Bruce Arians Tampa Bay offense. I like Tampa Bay to take a step up this year. They were very prolific a year ago. A lot of people forget that. Behind Jameis Winston and Ryan Fitzpatrick, the Buccaneers offense was tremendous. I'm expecting him to fire on all cylinders this year. And like I say, Mike Evans is the main guy in this offense. So I love his value here. We have him ranked 20th. The consensus has him at 23. So just a tick higher on him than most drafts have him. But we love Mike Evans this year. Keenan Allen, we have number 21. The consensus has him at 25. Again, 4 spots higher. You're splitting hairs. But again, it's similar prognosis as Mike Evans. He's just a centerpiece of the Chargers offense. I do believe the Chargers have more mouths to fill. They have Melvin Gordon, Mike Williams, Hunter Henry coming back healthy. But again, when Philip Rivers needs a big-time catch and conversion, he's looking to Keenan Allen first. He is the number 1 wide receiver in his offense. And this is a safety. Remember, this is a half-point PPR format here, and Keenan Allen gives you that kind of upside and just a solid floor. You know what you're getting from him every single week in your fantasy team. T.Y. Hilton, a little different than Mike Evans and Keenan Allen, but he's more of the big play variety. But again, I love his role. He's very secure in this Indianapolis Colts offense, which I'm expecting to take another step forward in 2019. Andrew Luck is another year removed from his injury. That offensive line is becoming a force. It's one of the best units in all of the NFL. So Andrew Luck has plenty of time to throw the football down the field, and that's what T.Y. Hilton specializes in. So I just think, again, he's the centerpiece of the receiving weapons they have in Indianapolis. So T.Y. Hilton, safe projection for us. We have him 22. The consensus has him at 25. A.J. Green, we have him at 23, and the consensus has him at 24. So again, right in line. I'm expecting Cincinnati to have a solid offense underneath Zach Taylor. And I really like the fact that A.J. Green is going to bounce back. Again, he's been a fringe first rounder, early second rounder for a long time, and now you can get him at the end of round 2, entering round 3. I got him in round 4 in one draft, which is insane. I would not expect that in most drafts, but there's a chance you can get A.J. Green in round 3. And again, you're just reaping tremendous value getting a player of his caliber and the role in that offense. I just love A.J. Green a lot this year as well. So, and this is where you see the difference. So we prioritize that group of 5 wide receivers: Antonio Brown, Mike Evans, Keenan Allen, T.Y. Hilton, and A.J. Green. We pushed them up over consensus rankings above the trio of tight ends, Travis Kelce, who we ranked 24. We have Zach Ertz ranked 25, and George Kittle ranked 26. And again, in consensus, Zach Ertz is coming off the board at 20, and George Kittle at 21. So again, we're same ballpark here. You don't understand any huge differences or any huge swings. I think the biggest differences so far is Dalvin Cook. We have him up 6 spots versus consensus, and David Johnson down 8 spots. But for the most part, these guys are right in line, a few selections here and there. But again, as I said earlier, I prefer to get my wide receiver 1 before I go after my tight end. There's been a few drafts where, again, Zach Ertz or George Kittle have slid a little bit versus what you see in the consensus, and I've gotten them with an early 3rd round pick. I don't mind that. I think that's value. That's why I have them ranked on 25 and 26 on my big board. I would take them in that spot. I just feel like mid round 2 is just a little early for me, so I just prefer to go in their direction. To each their own. I think they're all valuable fantasy commodities. It's all about your preference. So now we got through the top 25 to 26 players on our big board. You will begin to see here and there a few players that there's more fluctuation in their value for us one way or the other against the consensus. So we'll start right here. Number 27 on our big board is Julian Edelman. He currently is number 40 on the consensus big board. I just think Julian Edelman is incredibly safe this year. He is the number 1 wide receiving option for Tom Brady. I know the Patriots' offense has become more run balanced recently. I really just do not understand the fact that he's undervalued in the fantasy football community for my money. Just take a look at how he performed after the bye week last year moving forward. So after week number 11, in week 12 he had 84 yards, then 25 in week 13, 86 in week 14, 90 in week 15, 70 in week 16, 69 yards in week 17, and he kept it going into the playoffs against the Chargers, 151 yards, against the Chiefs, 96 yards, and in the Super Bowl, 141 yards on 10 receptions. So, Tom Brady leans on Julian Edelman, and with the absence of Rob Gronkowski, who retired, I'm expecting him to be even more of a focal point in this offense. So I just don't understand why he's being drafted after some of the guys that he is. And they have consensus has a late 4th round value or mid 4th round value on him. I really like him in round 3, and I would take him late round 3, early round 4 every single time. So Julian Edelman is one of the guys I really like this year. We have the pair of Minnesota Vikings come off the board next. Adam Thielen at number 28 on our big board, followed by Stephon Diggs, who is number 29. And again, when you look at the big board comparison, they're 29 and 30. So again, we're right in line with what you're seeing in your average fantasy football draft right now. Our next 5 prospects on the board, we really go running back centric here. Number 30 on our big board is Leonard Fournette, followed by 31, Aaron Jones. Number 32, Sony Michel. 33, the rookie, first rookie off the board, Joshua Jacobs to the Los Angeles Raiders. Number 34, Marlon Mack out of Indianapolis. And number 35, Damian Williams. So, again, you'll see a little difference here and just strategy. We really prioritize running back at this portion in the draft. And let's say Aaron, the rating line of some of these guys. So, we have Leonard Fournette, number 30 on our big board. Consensus has him at 32. That's right in line. We have Aaron Jones, 31. The consensus has him at 33. So those 2 guys are right in line. We won't belittle the point there. It seems to be about their value. So consensus has Patrick Mahomes at 31. We'll get into him in a little while, but we don't value the quarterback position anywhere near that high. Even though we have to admit Patrick Mahomes is pretty fun to own as a fantasy owner. He is a pretty explosive playmaker for your offense. But so Sony Michel, we have him number 32 on our big board. The consensus has him as 37, so we're a little higher on him. I just think that his role in the Patriots offense is secure. I know he doesn't give you much upside as a pass catcher out of the backfield, But in his case, again, at this point in the draft, you're going to late round 3. I think this is a sense of safety in drafting Sonny Michel. He is the lead runner for a Patriots team who's going to put up a lot of points. We have Joshua Jacobs, number 33 on our list. Now, I won't go into the consensus rankings on Joshua Jacobs. I just don't think they've caught up yet. I think there must have been a lot of drafts prior to the rookie draft, or rookies even being considered, because he's really low on the big board. So, on the consensus rankings I'm looking at from Fantasy Pros, so I'm not going to dive into him. I think you'll see his ranking catch up to ours as we move forward. I think he's right firmly in the third round mix. 34, Marlon Mack. So we're a little down on Marlon Mack against the consensus. So they have him number 28. So whereas they see him as an early third rounder, we see him more as a late third rounder, 6 spots lower when they rank him. And again, it's nothing against Marlon Mack, the player. I really love Marlon Mack, the player. I think he's a really good player. I think he is in a really good offense. Again, the Colts offensive line is dominant at the point of contact and becoming one of the better run blocking units out there. I think it's going to benefit Marlon Mack. And again, the Colts are going to score a ton of points. The issue I have is that the Colts are they seem committed to a running back by committee approach. So it feels like the community out there loves Marlon Mack, and I love Marlon Mack than the Colts brass actually do. So again, not that we're down on Marlon Mack. I like him as a third rounder. I just tend to draft him at the end of round 3 rather than early round 3. So I don't have many shares of Marlon Mack so far in the draft season. And number 35 on our list, Damian Williams. He comes in on the consensus at 39. We're pretty close here. We have him as an early third round or late third rounder, and the consensus has him as an early fourth rounder. Again, I think he's just a marginal talent. I think he's a good player, not a great player, but I think his role in the Kansas City offense at this point, it has to be taken seriously and viewed as secure. They didn't draft anybody. They just they went out and signed Carlos Hyde, but I think he's going to play the big bruiser back to Damian Williams. Damian Williams seems to be in the role of Kareem Hunt, and we've seen how prolific that position can be for Kansas City and for your fantasy team. So if Damian Williams can perform anywhere near that level, you're getting that kind of production at the end of round 3. I really like the value of Damian Williams as we sit here today. Transitioning from 36 down to in our rankings, 38. We have them back to back to back. Los Angeles Rams wide receivers. This is not by design, just how it worked out. So we have Robert Woods, number 36, Brandon Cooks, 37, and Cooper Kupp, 38. So again, when you look at the consensus, they also have Robert Woods, number 36, and they also have Cooper Kupp, number 38. So we are right in step with those guys. The consensus is a little higher on Brandon Cooks, has him 34. We have him 37. But again, when you're this far into your big board conversation, you're only off 2 or 3 slots, it means you're probably off just by a handful of yards. So we're not going to belittle the point there. Let's going to move on our big board. 39 through 42. We have Devonta Freeman, the running back out of Atlanta. He kind of stands out here because he's in a group of 6 wide receivers, the 3 out of Los Angeles. And then the 3 wide receivers who follow him, on number 40 on our big board, Sammy Watkins, wide receiver out of Kansas City. Number 41 is Tyler Boyd, wide receiver out of Cincinnati. And number 42 is Chris Godwin, wide receiver out of Tampa Bay. So I bring up this group because this is one of my favorite groups in the entire draft. I just really like this group collectively. Again, Devonta Freeman, 39. The consensus has him right now at 45 and seems to be gaining some momentum. I like him as a early 4th round pick. So if you happen to go, say it lines up, you have a late 1st round pick. Say you try to get balance and you get a DeAndre Hopkins or Devontae Adams in round 1. You come back with, say, a Joe Mixon in round 2. Let's say Stephon Diggs falls to you towards the end of round 3, which has happened in a few drafts. And now you're looking for a running back complement to this team. Devonta Freeman is a perfect guy to add to that roster. So I really like him as an early fourth round pick. I think Atlanta has taken some strides to balance their offense. They went out in the first round of 2019 draft and drafted maybe a potential All-Pro offensive guard in Chris Lidstrom out of Boston College. And then they traded back up in the round one and got Caleb McGarry, offensive tackle out of Washington. So they really wanted to solidify and address their offensive line, and they did just that. So, a lot of times at this point in the fantasy season, I look at what teams did in the draft. A lot of times it's telling. It tells you the direction of what they want to do and what they want to be as a team in the NFL draft. And that's what the Atlanta Falcons did immediately. They said, we want to block for Matt Ryan, make sure he can stand upright, and also we want to start running the football a little better with Devontae Freeman and Ito Smith. Remember, no Tevin Coleman this year. He won't be cutting into the workload for Devontae Freeman. I think Ito Smith will take over a Tevin Coleman role. I just don't think he's as good as Tevin Coleman. So I think ultimately it's a benefit for the aforementioned Devontae Freeman. Sammy Watkins comes in next, number 40 on our big board. Again, a wide swing here. He is 14 spots up on our big board versus the consensus. Right now, he is number 54 out there in drafts. So what that tells you is we have a round 4 grade on him versus a round 5 by the public. Again, I'm a big believer in Sammy Watkins. There's a lot to unpack here when you're talking about his value. It really is tied in on some level with Tyreek Hill. I'm not expecting Tyreek Hill to suit up and play football in 2019. So what that does is Sammy Watkins becomes the number 1 receiver in your passing game. Now, you do have Travis Kelce. So I carefully said the word receiver. I think Travis Kelce is still the number 1 option in your passing game. But to be the number 2 option and number 1 wide receiver for Patrick Mahomes and an Andy Reid offense, I'm expecting Sammy Watkins to have a very explosive 2019 season. Last year, he was beset by injury, and it really took away from his performance on the field. So, again, if he can stay healthy and on the football field for 16 games, I'm a big believer in Sammy Watkins. If I have an early pick in the draft, I have no problem taking Sammy Watkins late round 4. I think that'll allow you to get him before he gets into round 5, where I think a lot of people will be targeting him at that point. Tyler Boyd, we had number 41 on our list. I want to highlight him as well because we are big believers in Tyler Boyd. Again, we have him as a 4th rounder, and the consensus has him ranked 62 on their big board. I really don't understand the, I don't say hatred for Tyler Boyd, but the discrepancy here. We view him as a late 4th rounder. The consensus has him in round 6. I would love to get Tyler Boyd in round 6. I just don't see it happening in most of my drafts. I think his role in the Cincinnati Bengals offense is secure. Andy Dalton's coming back. Zach Taylor's coming into the fold to rejuvenate the Bengals offense. Bengals did nothing in the offseason to address wide receivers, so they view Tyler Boyd as the running mate to A.J. Green. And I think Tyler Boyd just, he set himself up for a good career in 2018, had a great season, missed the last 2 games of the season, just fell short of 1,000 yards. But I'm expecting with health, he'll go over 1,000 yards this year and will be great value. So, again, we grade him as a round 4 guy. I would probably try to hold off and draft him in round 5, given the fact that what I'm seeing is that most consensus out there have him in round 6. It's all about value, so there's no reason for me to jump 2 rounds ahead. So I would probably prioritize somebody else in round 4 and then come back in round 5 and take my guy, Tyler Boyd. 42 is Chris Godwin. And again, this is a guy who's getting a lot of love out there in the fantasy football community. Again, it's all about having a role in an offense. Chris Godwin, this tremendous player, is going to be in a tremendous spot in Tampa Bay, playing opposite Mike Evans in the Bruce Arians offense out there in Tampa Bay. No Deshaun Jackson, no Adam Humphries. It's a lot of work and a lot of targets go around, and I think that Chris Godwin will be the immediate beneficiary of those targets. So we rank him number 42 on our list. The consensus has him at 47. So, again, pretty close there. We both view him as a mid to late 4th round pick in your fantasy draft. We're going to move on to 43 to 46 on our big board. They are all running backs. We have Derrick Henry at 43, Philip Lindsay at 44, followed by Mark Ingram, the newest Baltimore Raven, and Kerryon Johnson, running back at Detroit. So, again, versus the consensus where we are on these guys, seem to be a little higher than our most. So Derrick Henry, again, we're right in line. We're actually a tick lower on Derrick Henry. He's 41 on the consensus. We have him at 43. Now, we know Derrick Henry is not going to give you much as a pass catcher, so it does significantly limit his upside. However, the Titans have firmly committed to Derrick Henry as their running back of choice. They built their offense around him. They become a physical run-first offense. So Derrick Henry feels right here about mid to late round 4. Again, if you had skipped out on running back early, maybe you went Zeke or Saquon early in your draft, and then you came back with a tandem of A.J. Green and T.Y. Hilton. And now Derrick Henry remains on the board. If you can get him in late round 4, I think it's a good value. That's about where we have him ranked on our big board. Number 44, Philip Lindsay. We're slightly higher on Lindsay than the consensus. I just think he's a really good football player. I know there's been some talk out there about getting the ball to Royce Freeman more often. You watch the football game, and Royce Freeman is not a bad player, but he's not as good as Philip Lindsay. I don't think anybody who's watched any Denver Broncos football from 2018 would agree with that. So I just think Philip Lindsay is still going to be the running back 1 for the Denver Broncos. Again, the consensus has him at number 50. We rank him at 44, so we're just slightly higher on Lindsay than what you see in most drafts. I know a guy we absolutely are higher on is Mark Ingram. We rank him 45, and the consensus has him at 59. This is one of those discrepancies where we view Mark Ingram as a late 4th round pick. I believe you can target Mark Ingram in late round 4, very early round 5, and the consensus has him as a late 5th rounder, maybe even in round 6. So, again, that's the difference between our rankings and the consensus you're seeing out there. I really like the marriage of Mark Ingram with the run-heavy Baltimore Ravens approach. Again, I know there's been some conversation out there about making them a little more balanced and Lamar Jackson taking a step forward as a passer, which is fine and good. That can only help Mark Ingram and his role in his offense. I think the Ravens are going to score. I think they caused a problem with Lamar Jackson's ability to run. And Mark Ingram is a talented runner in between the tackles. So I think it's a really good fit. I think Mark Ingram will lead this backfield in touches by a wide margin. So, again, I think if you get him in late round 4, early into the 5th round, he's going to be a great value for your football team. Number 46 on our rankings, Kerryon Johnson. Again, we are 5 spots higher on Kerryon Johnson than the consensus. They have him number 51. So again, not a big margin here. We just view him as a late 4th rounder, and the consensus has him as a mid 5th rounder. He is in line to take over the lion's share of the touches. You see what I did there? Lion's share, because he plays for Detroit Lions. So no, he's a talented runner. I think Detroit has committed to being a balanced offense. They've tried to build up their offensive line, and I think Kerryon Johnson will be he'll be ready for a breakout season in 2019. So we value him as the 46th ranked player on our big board. And now 47 to 50, you'll see some names you recognize. Jarvis Landry, the target monster for the Cleveland Browns. And following Lindsay, we have our first quarterbacks coming off the board, back to back here. 48, we have Patrick Mahomes, the sensational quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs. Number 49, we have Aaron Rodgers. And number 50, we have Andrew Luck. So this is the part of the draft where, to me, if you're trying to take a big swing and get one of the top-notch quarterbacks, this is where I'm okay with it, here at the beginning of round number 5. I am not a fan of taking a quarterback in your first 4 rounds. And in fact, I'm really not a big fan of taking quarterback here. I just recognize the value of having a quarterback who is a difference maker in round 5. So I would not object to it. Personally, I almost never go quarterback this early in the first round in your drafts. I'm a big believer in waiting at the position. I normally draft my quarterback around rounds 10 to 11. But if you're going to go quarterback early, these are the guys to get, and this is where to get them. Mahomes is still our number one quarterback after much debate. We originally had Rodgers there, but went back and looked at some more. I think we're going a little bit overboard with Tyreek Hill. I know he's going to affect the offense a great deal. But again, if you look at what Patrick Mahomes did a year ago with 50 touchdown passes, he was in another stratosphere versus other quarterbacks. So where we're going to bring Patrick Mahomes back down to earth, and we're going to ding him significantly for the loss of Tyreek Hill and Kareem Hunt, he still deserves to be the QB number one in this group by virtue of what he did in 2018. Even if he is 80 to 90% of what he was in 2019, he should be the quarterback number one. Again, I spoke about the Packers offense briefly early in the podcast. I'm expecting a big year from Aaron Rodgers and the weapons there in Green Bay. And Andrew Luck, again, I just feel very safe with him at this point, which is in startling contrast to how we felt last year. Remember, just a year ago, entering the 2018 fantasy football drafts, Andrew Luck was a wild card. He fell in a lot of drafts because a lot of people were concerned about his shoulder injury. You weren't sure what you're getting. He came back and performed amazingly in 2018. So there's a lot of momentum. There's a ton of momentum behind Andrew Luck and the Indianapolis Colts heading into 2019. And I think you'll see it play out in your fantasy football team and your fantasy football league. So Andrew Luck is one of my favorite quarterbacks. We have him as QB3 in this group. And we kind of ran past Jarvis Landry. We have him number 47 on our big board. He's number 52 in the consensus rankings. Again, what kind of effect will Odell Beckham Jr. have on him in this Cleveland Browns offense? I don't know how much, to be quite frank. I think what will happen is he won't see as many targets, but I also think his targets will be better. I think that a defense will have to pay attention to Odell Beckham Jr., which should open up more options and opportunities for Jarvis Landry. So I think we've seen enough of Jarvis Landry throughout his NFL career. We know he's one of the more consistent performers on the football field. So if you can get somebody like that late in round 4, early round 5, I'm all for Jarvis Landry. I think he's a terrific real-life player, and I think he's also a very good fantasy football player as well. And just to mention the quarterbacks again versus where the consensus have them, we have Mahomes at 48. Clearly, as much later in the consensus has him as 31. So we have him 17 spots lower than what you'll see in the most drafts. We have Aaron Rodgers at 49. In most drafts, he's going off the board at 46. And we have Andrew Luck at 50. And he's going off the board in most drafts at 44. So again, just slightly lower at the quarterback position than the consensus. They have them. Andrew Luck and Aaron Rodgers come off the board in round 4. We are more of a round 5 value on those two quarterbacks. Ladies and gentlemen, that has been our top 50 on our big board. We just entering past the 44-minute mark on our podcast. So we want to cut it off here. We're going to make this a 2-part episode so we don't go long and drive you guys into the ground. So on our next podcast, we're going to dive into our big board, number 51 all the way through number 100. Don't gloss over this podcast. This is where your fantasy league is won and lost. It's building your depth. You're talking about here at this point of draft from round 5 into rounds 6, 7, 8, 9, maybe even some guys from round 10 are going in your draft may find their way onto our top 100 big board. Most fantasy experts will give you this advice. Your fantasy league is not won in the early rounds of the draft. That's not where you win your draft. That's where you avoid losing your draft. You don't lose. You don't want to take a guy in round 1 or 2 and is injured for the season. That's how you lose a fantasy league. The way you win your fantasy league is to build a complete roster and have depth at all positions. Use your waiver wire, add free agents throughout the season, constantly being fluid and making adjustments as the season goes along. So if you think you can listen to this first podcast here and say, well, I got rounds 1 to 4 covered, so I'm good, you are mistaken, my friend. So the next podcast, our rankings 51 to 100, is vitally important. Might be even more important than this podcast. And I can say it now since you've already listened to it. So again, thank you guys for joining in and listening to us today. I hope you guys appreciate the podcast, appreciate the information here. You can find us online at thenextbigthinginsports.com. And you can find us anywhere that has podcast-related material. You know the deal at your Apple iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, Stitcher. And as I always say, upon your arrival to these platforms, if you would, kind ladies and sirs out there, if you would leave us a 5-star review, it would go a long way to building the brand and getting some momentum for the podcast. So once again, we are the Next Big Thing in Sports podcast, and we will check you out again next time.